Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to our event on executive search techniques. Thank you very much for joining us. There's quite a lot to cover in terms of this session, and we're going to kick off with, I guess, brief intros on me and Jolanta, and then we'll start getting into the meat of the discussion. So a bit of brief background on me. So my name is Peter Franks. I'm the founder of Neon River. We are a headhunting firm that really specializes in working with internet, games, and technology companies. And so I've got quite a lot of experience as a headhunter. I've been doing it for 17 years, ever since I was a kind of 22-year-old pup back in the day, and now at the ripe old age of 39 years old. And I'll hand over to Jolanta so she can introduce herself, and then we'll get into the meat of the discussion.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jolanta Sankova. I've been working at Neon River for 3 years now. I help with the identification, approaching, attracting talent to our projects. And yeah, it's been great working with Peter for 3 years. And I'm very glad that you've joined us today and look forward to, listening to your questions and hopefully answering some of them during the conference.
Indeed, thank you, Jolanta. And I guess the purpose of this is to, I guess, share a little bit of insight and kind of demystify a little bit how, we as headhunting firms, conduct our assignments. And looking at the audience, it feels like we've got different motives, perhaps, as to why different people are attending. We've got some in-house recruiters who maybe they need to, figure out how do we, source more candidates directly, because maybe the job adverts that we run, aren't working so well at the moment. We've also got a whole bunch of external recruiters who maybe are looking for some advice in terms of, how do you headhunt candidates more effectively. I'm very conscious of the fact that, there's quite a lot to cover in this session, and we've also got broad levels of experience in terms of the audience that we're dealing with. We might have some folks who've got very little experience of headhunting, and some guys who've got quite a lot. And so there'll probably be parts of the information in the presentation that I go through which are probably quite basic if you're an experienced headhunter, but might be quite interesting if you're relatively new to it. So the two main areas we're going to sort of focus on today are how do you find candidates, so what we call kind of research in kind of headhunting parlance, and also then how do you approach candidates, how do you convert them into being interested in opportunities. And I'm very keen for this session to be as interactive as possible. So it's not just kind of, me just waxing lyrical for ages and ages and boring you to tears. So if you do have any questions along the way, or if there's anything that you'd like a view on or like insight on, obviously let us know in the chat and let us know in the Q&A functionality within Zoom. And I wanted to kick off with a couple of caveats, which are firstly that obviously, we're technology industry headhunters, and there'll be obviously people who are listening to this who work in very different industries where maybe there's different nuances and things work in different ways. And I can't claim to have any insights really of any note in terms of how you do great headhunting in financial services or in manufacturing or in the public sector. But I do suspect there are some areas where there's a good amount of crossover with some of the techniques and some of the things we're going to talk about. So without further ado, what I'm going to do is I'm going to screen share and I'm going to go through a little presentation I've put together, which hopefully describes some of the key things we're talking about. Now, I must confess that I haven't put a huge amount of time into making this presentation look tremendously pretty, but I'm hopeful that from a content point of view, there's going to be some useful stuff that will help us to I guess find our perfect candidates. Now, sorry, my Window's being weird for some reason. Okay. So if we start from the beginning, so what is executive search? Well, let's not be sort of pretentious about it. It's just a form of recruiting where really our mission is to go out there and we're trying to convert passive candidates into being active candidates that are interested in in our projects and whatever we're recruiting for. And this is obviously increasingly important. What certainly we're finding in the tech space at the moment is that it's a candidates market. If you're a good candidate, you'll get tons of approaches from different recruiters every single week, every single day, probably. And so, you're not going to respond to a job advert because you're happy doing what you do. You're not actively looking for a job. So the only way you're going to get this kind of tier one candidate is by firstly finding them and then persuading them that there's a bigger, better, sexier, more exciting kind of opportunity out there. And so as we go into the detail, I guess, around kind of how we do that, it'll be quite interesting to note some of the techniques, but I wanted to talk a little bit first, just at a high level, about some of the key principles that I think are important as a recruiter, whether you work in-house or whether you work for somebody else. And I think as recruiters, we're always optimists because we've got a problem. We need to hire someone who is going to fulfill this particular role. And we really, really want to please whichever client that we're working for, whether that's an external client if you work for an agency, whether that's a line manager, whether if you work in-house. And so we see candidates as potential solutions to these problems. And sometimes, very often, we're a little bit overly optimistic about how good the candidate really is, about whether they really solve the problem or not. And I think you've got to be very conscious of this kind of equation as a recruiter, that every candidate you put forward that your client likes makes you look good, and every candidate they don't like makes you look bad. So try and be selective. And I think a rule of thumb that I always use, whenever I'm looking at a candidate's profile and I'm not quite sure whether they're right or whether they're strong enough for this particular role or not, if I find myself kind of umming and erring about whether they're appropriate or not, I make sure that I don't go after them, because I find that if I'm not sure about them, I'm probably, even after doing this for 17 years, more optimistic about them than I should be, compared to somebody who's the line manager who's going to look at it with more of a skeptical eye. So if you're not sure, I would always recommend don't approach the candidate. They're probably not strong enough. And I guess feeding into that first point, time. Time is the most important asset you have ultimately as a recruiter, because all these projects and all these techniques that I'm going to talk about, they take time to execute. And it's always better to spend twice as much time going after the really, really good candidates, the ones that are actually going to get offers, the ones that are actually going to solve the problem, rather than kind of wasting time on average candidates who, in a heart of hearts, in reality, are never going to get hired. And I think you've always got to resist that temptation as a recruiter, just to kind of put lots of candidates forward as a kind of as a kind of comfort blanket. We've all done it on occasions where we thought, Christ, I haven't really found the solution yet. So what we'll do is we'll put a bazillion candidates forward. And there'll be lots of stuff going on, and no one can accuse me as the recruiter of not having done any work on this, because look at all these candidates you're meeting. But ultimately, your customers won't thank you once they've interviewed all those candidates, probably rejected all of them. They'll think, they didn't really solve the problem. And also, I've kind of wasted a bit of my time doing this. So protect your time. And the easiest way to burn time is with irrelevant candidates. So just don't approach them if you can in the first place. Have that discipline and have that sort of harsh eye when it comes to assessing whether the fit is strong enough or not. And kind of tying into that, the closer you stay to your candidates, the harder it is to let you down. The reality is, when you headhunt somebody, probably 60, 70, 80% of the time, they're in various shades of looking for a new job. It's fairly rare, even if you headhunt somebody, that they're completely, entirely satisfied with doing what they do. There's usually some push factors. And so because there's some push factors, and because they're open to talking to you, they're probably open to talking to other people as well, which means they've probably got multiple opportunities on the go. The more of a close personal bond you can create as a recruiter with a candidate, the harder it will be for them to let you down and to choose one of their other competitive opportunities over yours. As a recruiter, you can't change what the company does, how much money you can offer necessarily. There's lots of these really important things that you can't change. But by forming a bond emotionally with the candidates, you build a personal relationship with them, which then actually, in a way, gives you a competitive advantage. And that's built up of a few little things. It's giving the candidates proper feedback after interviews, preparing them ahead of interviews and letting them know what to expect in terms of the interviewers and the different styles. It's sounding them out and getting them a sense of, okay, where are you with these other opportunities? What stage are they at? How do you feel about them? That sort of thing. These were all things that will help you to get a higher proportion of accepted rather than rejected offers, I guess, along the line. And I guess also building into this point, but this is more of a kind of a long-term point. As I mentioned, I've been doing this for a while, for 17 years. And I think as I reflect earlier in my career, worth noting, I've always worked for agencies rather than kind of working in-house. And I think this is particularly important if you work for agencies. Don't get me wrong, back in the day, if you're a candidate in one of my searches, I would be professional and considerate, and I would do absolutely everything I can to give you a good impression, to hopefully try and place you. But I didn't really look to build long-term relationships with candidates. If I had a project and you were a fit for the project, fantastic. But really beyond that, I didn't really make a lot of effort. I had quite a transactional relationship with candidates. And now that I've got my own headhunting firm, actually I look back and I think, bugger, I wish earlier I'd put more effort into doing that. Because here's the thing, you might be young right now, you might be in a position where actually your performance isn't measured on winning clients and that sort of thing. But the reality is, once you get to a level of experience where your role slightly does become about that, what you'll realize is that, I'm sure you're good and professional at doing what you do, but guess what? there's a bunch of other recruiters and headhunters out there who have exactly the same sector specialism or industry or functional specialism as you, who are just as good as you, or at least close enough so that it's hard to tell from the outside. So why does a particular CEO or a particular investor or a particular company choose to work with you rather than with somebody else? Well, that could be because you're just so awesome that you're massively better than everybody else. But that's probably quite unlikely. It's simply because they like you. They want to work with you personally because they like your style, because maybe you've helped them out before, because they trust you. And so as I reflect now, probably 60% of my clients are former candidates that I've worked with who likes the experience of working with me. And you've got to be there for those candidates even when you don't have a live recruitment project for them. It might be that they're changing jobs and they're looking for advice in terms of where they should go next. Maybe they've got 2 competing job offers, neither of which are with you, but they're just looking for advice in terms of which one's better. Are you going to take time out of their day and show that person that you care about them, over and above them being a means to an end for you in your recruitment projects? Grow with your network, because those guys that you're working with now, who might be relatively junior, might be not senior enough to give you work, in 5 years' time, those guys are going to be potentially CEOs, chairmen, investors, the kind of people who can give you nice recruitment projects. So build your network and grow with it. And I think sort of completely different tack, last but not least, if I have a bugbear about how most companies do recruiting wrong, it's around job descriptions. Your average company job description, being really honest, is crap. And the reason why it's crap is because it has the wrong emphasis. It's usually like, here's 2 cursory paragraphs of copy and paste off the company website about the business. Here's a gigantic laundry list of experiences that we're looking for, most of which are put in terms that are frankly irrelevant to what we're really looking for. And with that, I'm thinking about things like, I'm looking for 10 years experience of X, right? Firstly, the thing that defines a good candidate is not 10 versus 12 versus 7 versus 9 years experience of X. Secondly, try and avoid putting years of X in job descriptions, because it's a subtle form of age discrimination that you shouldn't really do, and it's slightly risky putting it in there. And I think the broader point, though, around job descriptions is spend much more time talking about the company. And particularly if you work in-house, try and put yourself in the shoes of someone objectively who doesn't know about your business, who isn't drinking the Kool-Aid about your business. What would they want to know about it, and why objectively would this be a sexy / interesting company to work for? So when we write job descriptions, it probably takes me most of a day to write one. I'm doing it in PowerPoints. It's probably anywhere from maybe 8 to 15 slides, probably 75% of which is about the company. It's about what do they do, what's their product, what's their market, what are interesting statistics that might illustrate the success. The reason why I like PowerPoint is that you can use imagery to make it a bit more eye-catching and a bit more vibrant in terms of how you do it. Because you've got to remember that you can give any candidate a really compelling, verbal pitch on the phone, and we'll get into that later. But you've got to remember that it's going to be that job description on a Sunday morning, that ultimately, contributes just as much as the phone call you did with them to converting them or not. And so whilst the document shouldn't be salesy, it's a sales document ultimately. So spend less time, listing, vague attributes like we're looking for a team player and a good communication. So I'm sure you are, and all that stuff's good. No one really cares about that, right? Spend more time, much more time than one would normally, in terms of how do you make this role in this company seem really, really interesting and compelling enough to get someone out of a attractive, competitive alternative. So anyway, these are just a few general thoughts in terms of sort of general principles of good recruiting. But now we're going to some of the meat around, okay, practically, how do you headhunt candidates? And let's start with research. Okay, so as headhunters, how do we find candidates? So there's 2 fundamental ways in which, I guess, conceptually you can find candidates. The first is people you already know. So in headhunter parlance, we might call that skimming. So that's going to be looking through, similar past assignments you might have done, who are the guys you liked. And that's why it's important, obviously, to capture as much information you can about candidates. If you're chatting to a candidate on the phone and they're telling you about their experience, in the recruitment software that you use, maybe there'll be like a little free-form text section where you can just scribble down some notes about how much they're paid. I often put something like, seems a good guy in notes. If it's someone who's on the phone where they've given me a good kind of just good feel, you get that sort of intuitive feel whether someone's a good candidate on the phone. I'll always write that down so that when I'm looking at a previous assignment, I think, oh yeah, I remember I spoke to Johnny and he was a really good guy. Actually, I should give him a try for this. Now, the reality is that skimming only gets you so far, and probably only 20% of the candidates that you might need for an assignment. I think people sometimes get it a little bit twisted around kind of how headhunting works. I think if people think that we're, these kind of, super deep industry specialists that have been, watching and waiting in the shadows to sort of pluck people over the years. Don't get me wrong, having specialism and a network of candidates, people is really important, and it's a differentiator for you. But the reality is you can't know everybody. In today's world of LinkedIn, where there's millions and millions of candidates describing their experience in tons of countries around the world, and how probably practically for you as a recruiter, you're going to be working on different things, different geographies, different functions. It's impossible to know everybody. So you've got to have a mechanism by which you get to know the right people who you don't know already. And that's where research basically comes in. So the bulk of research is finding these new candidates who maybe we've never spoken to them before. Maybe we have, but we just don't know them that well, but they could be perfect. It's our job to create this kind of thorough process that gets those guys. So now this takes time. And, if you had a very narrow sector focus, you could maybe go, oh yes, I know the 5 best guys. I'm just going to phone those 5 and one of them will get the job. If you do that, absolutely superb. But the reality is for 99% of recruiters, you can't do that, not least because these products are hard and it's going to take a lot of candidates to get to your solution, because a lot of them are going to say no, because maybe you've got the wrong location. Maybe the company isn't that sexy. Maybe people are just happy doing what they're doing and it's a candidate's market. So often you might need to identify 100, 200, sometimes more than that candidates in order to get to a result. Now, LinkedIn is obviously a fantastically powerful research tool. And even though a lot of headhunting firms don't like talking about using LinkedIn that much, because maybe it seems like we should have more of our own proprietary networks. Let's be honest, the reality is, I don't care how good your internal recruitment database is, it's not as powerful as LinkedIn, because it's like you might have a little black book of contacts, but if you've got millions of people describing their experience around the world, that's always going to be more powerful. So how do you really utilize that and get the most out of it? Now, at the core of finding candidates on using tools like LinkedIn is this concept of Boolean search. So Boolean search is a bit of a fancy expression, and I'm just sort of touching on it fairly briefly here, and there's tons of stuff on the internet, tons of resources. You can read about it. But what Boolean search really is about making search strings, the way you search for candidates on things like LinkedIn, more efficient. And probably the 2 things you're going to use, you're going to really need to know about, are these and or clauses. And basically what they do is they enable you to say, okay, either I'm looking for one of many different permutations of the same thing. And this is particularly useful for finding job titles, right? Where often there'll be different variations of job title on the theme, right? So you could be a marketing director, you could be a vice president of marketing, you could be a marketing manager, you could be a head of marketing. And what we don't want to have to do is do separate searches and plug in every single one of these different permutations of job title. What we can do is we can use these operators like and or in order to create these really efficient search strings where we kind of capture all the different job titles this person might have. And then as we try to find different candidates, we can just plug in different companies into that sort of into that equation. So by the way, this is all being recorded, so if you want to sort of look at some of the stuff in more detail, then obviously you can sort of thereafter. But yeah, if we go into kind of the idea that job titles vary, this is where we start getting into the kind of the meat of things. And obviously you've got these words, chief, manager, director, head, vice president, which I call a level signifier. And they give you a sense of the seniority of the candidate, but obviously it's just a sense, because there's some companies where everybody's a vice president, and I use the example here of investment banks where you join as a grad, you're an associate vice president or whatever. Okay, that doesn't mean a lot. You work for Google, you're a vice president, making millions of dollars a year, you're a very, very big cheese. So you've always got to take job titles with a grain of salt, but equally they're not worthless in terms of giving you a sense of the seniority of a person. So you've got to think a little bit about, okay, from a functional perspective, this job that I'm doing, that I'm looking after, what are the different permutations of job title that this person might have? The good news is, for most functions, it's pretty vanilla, right? You can be pretty sure that someone who works in, if you're looking for a CFO, someone will have had a job title involving the word finance. at one point or another in their career. Ditto marketing, ditto sales. Now there are some exceptions. So for example, if you look at software engineering searches, yes, you might be a software engineer, you might be an engineering manager, you might be a director of engineering, you might be a VP of engineering, but you might be a CTO, which doesn't have the word engineering in it. So sometimes what we have to do is create these slightly more complex strings, just because there isn't this obvious functional keyword that gets absolutely everybody. But in most cases, you can do that. Now, because I guess we work at a kind of relatively senior executive search level, I often use this director or head or VP or vice president string, which I call a level signifier. And the idea behind it is that for the kind of work that we do, if you've never had a head of, a director, a VP level title before, you're probably not senior enough for the work that we do. And of course, talent's like a pyramid, right? There's more junior candidates from a quantity perspective than there are the more senior ones. And when you're doing these search strings, you've got to find that balance between creating a really specific string, which might be great in the sense that it's super targeted, and therefore you don't have to sift through a lot of irrelevant candidates. But equally, the more targeted you are, the more narrow and tight that string becomes, you're actually excluding relevant candidates who maybe just haven't chosen to talk about whatever that thing is that you're looking for, even though they have that experience. And you've always got to remember that when you're using things like LinkedIn, people who fill out their profiles don't do so completely. And so you've got to be careful about using extremely specific search strings, because of course the candidate might not have bothered to fill out that little bit of their profile that you're looking for. So I think experiment with different kinds of searches. There can be really general ones where you've got 1,000 people in the results, and yeah, you're going to have to sift through a bunch of irrelevant candidates to get to the good ones. But the good news about that loose string is that you're not ruling out lots of relevant candidates. A tight string might be more efficient from a time perspective, but equally, you might be missing out on people who just aren't talking about the things that you're looking for. But this level signifier string of director or head or VP or vice president works really nicely with a lot of functions. So you can do marketing and engineering and so forth. And it's just a good go-to time-saving thing. And so, as I talked about a little bit, if you're looking for someone where it's got weird job titles or irregular job titles, like the CTO example I gave, you can do these really complicated search, well, not that complicated, but fairly complicated search strings where using these brackets, I'm saying, okay, find me, they could be engineering director, engineering head, engineering VP, engineering vice president, or they could be CTO or chief technology officer. And note how I've written both CTO and chief technology officer, because of course, unfortunately, search strings aren't smart enough to know that CTO and chief technology officer are the same thing, or that a VP and a vice president written out in long form are the same thing. So we've got to write it out, just because there might be one person who writes their job title as CTO and another person who writes it out as chief technology officer. And therefore we've got to be able to get both of those guys who choose to do it as well. And the other thing I kind of briefly touched on is you can use not clauses as well. Now, not as useful as and or clauses, but one way in which you might want to use them sometimes is by geography. So for example, you might be doing a keyword search where you're looking for a particular kind of candidate and you're getting loads of American candidates because obviously America is a big market and they come up a lot in your search. And you might want to say not America because actually that's the wrong geography. You're not looking for candidates in America. So sometimes that can be a useful way of doing things. Now, one of the disciplines I think that's really worth using and worth having if you're going to headhunt people is this idea of target landscapes. And target landscape is kind of a sort of industry-ish kind of phrase. But basically what it means is it's a segmentation of different companies by industry that are relevant for whatever it is that you're looking for. So obviously when you're getting the briefing from the line manager or whoever the client is and who's doing the hiring, you want to get a sense obviously of what are the key kind of measurable, useful skills that we're looking for. And when I say measurable, useful, I mean not that they're a team player or that they're honest or that they're a great communicator or whatever. I'm sure this stuff is important, but we can't build a search strategy around that. We're talking about the hard skills about what we're looking for. What industry experience do they need? What functional experience do they need? How senior do they need to be in terms of management, perhaps in terms of compensation? What can we afford in terms of the level of a candidate? So it might be the case, for example, that and I use this example down below, that okay, you're an internet business, you're looking for a really strong digital marketeer to drive customers to your website and convert them and all that kind of good stuff. Okay, cool. So what does that mean? Okay, it means that we're looking for a strong performance marketeer. Okay, so which companies do you find strong performance marketeers in? Well, generally it's going to be companies that sell products services over the internet, right? Because they need to obviously market in their products online the most. And so, okay, so these are e-commerce companies that sell stuff on the internet. Okay, what is e-commerce? Okay, well, e-commerce is a bunch of different subsectors. It could be online retail, it could be travel, it could be gambling, it could be fintech, it could be, you know, different marketplaces, it could be online dating. You know, there's a bunch of different subcategories. And indeed, some of those subcategories you can break down. You know, what is online retail? Okay, it's fashion, it's electronics, it's coffee, you know, it's all the different things that people sell online. So what we want to try and do is we want to try and find what the relevant sectors and subsectors that someone might work in. And then we want to populate those with actual real companies and that, you know, that are important in that space. And this becomes extremely useful, not just for the project that you're working on, but also obviously you can use them across different projects. And so whenever you're faced with a thorny big problem, like, you know, we need to find someone who's good at X, I think a good discipline and a good practice to do is always break a big difficult question into smaller chunks that are easier to answer, right? So you can break down the internet industry into useful categories and subcategories, and you can do that with any industry. And so by doing that, it'll give you inspiration in terms of where to look for candidates, and also a structure, a methodology that you can repeat across different projects that absolutely works. Now, I have to apologize in advance for the ugliness of this copy and paste target landscape that I've put in here, and the fact that it's also kind of enterprise software related that probably isn't that accessible. But this is not even a particularly broad software industry example of a target landscape. But what we've done is we've got obviously the different subcategories. And if you're doing research on a headhunting assignment, what you can do is you've got your job title search string on LinkedIn. I'm literally going to go through these companies one by one. Oh, who does this for Aptian? Plug in Aptian into the same job title search string. Oh, who does it at Freshworks? And literally go through the companies one by one, and you'll find a whole bunch of interesting candidates. This is the bread and butter of market research. It's having this discipline around going through creating target landscapes and going through them properly. I get the feeling that when a lot of people sort of try and do headhunting, they'll do a few kind of keywordy searches, which might be fantastic. It might get you some results, but you're not covering the market. If you have the discipline to create proper, thorough target landscapes and cover the market, you might find an extra 30 or 40% of candidates. That might be the difference between success and failure, or a quick result or a slow placement. Now, of course, the question becomes, how do you build a target landscape? Now, obviously, that's relatively easy if it's something that's consumery and obvious that we all kind of know as consumers, but you might well be working in a sector where it's B2B, or it's fairly obscure, or it's not that intuitive. The good news is you can find out a hell of a lot about any industry with pretty much zero pre-existing knowledge just by using Google and finding sort of relevant kind of lists of things. Now, finding lists of companies who do X is obviously great, and it's obviously a fantastically useful research tool. However, the challenge is that, of course, people pay to advertise to be on these lists. And to use a silly analogy, it might be a list of, imagine a list of, the most successful music artists of all time, and you've got Michael Jackson, and you've got, Britney Spears, and you've got Elvis Presley, and then you've got Rick Astley. And Rick Astley's the odd one out, right? Because Rick Astley's paid whoever to be on that list. So you've always got to be cynical about these lists, cross-check them, find multiple examples. But the good news is, once you've got to a point where you can be pretty sure, okay, I'm pretty sure that we've got 2 or 3 of the big guys who are the big players in this space. Put those 3 companies, or those 2 or 3 companies, into a Google search with largest whatever. So I use the example of King, Supercell, and Zynga for mobile games companies. In fact, you don't even need necessarily to put largest mobile games companies there, because you can guarantee that any article that's talking about King, Supercell, and Zynga is probably going to be talking about some of the largest mobile games companies in the world. And furthermore, you can have confidence, or a bit more confidence, in lists that we talk about the biggest mobile games companies in the world if they've got those 3 companies in it. So use things like Wikipedia, use Google searches, try and find a few marquee companies, and then you can use those guys by Googling them together to expand and find some of the smaller guys as well. Gartner Magic Quadrants are extremely useful as well. For those not familiar with them, Gartner's a market research firm, and one of the things they create is this what they call a magic quadrant, which is this kind of 4x4 thing where they talk about, which are the most innovative companies in the space. And we don't really care about which one's the most innovative. We just want to get a good sense of who the main players are. So if you do a Google image search for Gartner Magic Quadrant of a particular space, you might find a fantastic free bit of information that gets you a lot of what you need kind of straight off the bat. And if you're going to be doing research and systematically going through target landscapes, it's really important that you write down somewhere where you've been and where you haven't, for two reasons. Obviously, firstly, so that you don't waste time in terms of doing the stuff you've already done before. But secondly, if you're doing research and your boss, whether that's your line manager or if you work for an agency, whoever's your boss within the company, a good researcher always knows where they've been and where they haven't. They can give that kind of snappy answer. It gives confidence that you're on top of it and you're on it in terms of what you're looking for and that sort of thing. So when we identify candidates, I guess there's two fundamental ways in which we do it. We do systematic target landscape based research, where we go through all the relevant companies and all the relevant industries one by one. We find their current staff, we find their alumni who give us what they need. But we want to augment that with some keyword searches, because of course no target landscape is perfect, right? There's going to be maybe companies or even industries where for whatever reason we missed them, we didn't think about them when it came to the target landscape. So doing keyword searches is different from doing the kind of systematic company by company ID, because we're not going to specify the company. Instead, what we're going to try and do is zero in on some skills or experiences that a really relevant candidate might talk about. And whilst this probably won't give us a ton of people, because remember, a lot of people don't fill out their LinkedIn profiles with lots of detail and therefore may not hit keyword searches like this, it might give us a really nice sprinkling of super relevant candidates over the top. So you can use the same title string that you're using for everybody, but then instead of specifying by company, throw in the keywords section some relevant keywords. Obviously, that's going to depend massively on what the role is, what the function is. But yeah, if you're looking for a digital marketing specialist who's great at paid search, doing searching for SEM or search engine marketing would make a ton of sense. This isn't rocket science. It's usually just sticking in some pretty obvious stuff in keywords. But I think if you do that on top of the systematic ID, you're really covering your bases in terms of finding different candidates. So a very, very quick rush through of how to do research using tools like LinkedIn and using search strings and target landscapes and that sort of thing. Yeah, hopefully helpful. So any questions so far, Yolanta?
Nope, unfortunately, we don't have any questions yet, but
okay.
I did remind people to ask some questions in the chat. So guys, if you do have any questions about the research or the process or candidate identification or target landscape, please ask.
Fantastic. I've never met so many shy recruiters before. Okay, cool. So now let's talk about, I guess, the other part of it, which is how do we get hold of these candidates? How do we convert them, etc. So acquiring candidates. So what we've got to do, obviously, is we've got to reach out to them. Now, back in the day, 20 years ago, you'd probably just phone up the switchboard of the company that these people were working for and say, hey, I'd like to speak to Dave Smith or whatever, and they put you through. But obviously the world has changed in that sense, particularly if you do work in the tech space, good luck finding switchboard numbers for companies. And obviously, with remote working and so forth, often what we've got to do is we've got to message the candidates. It could be an email, could be an in-mail on LinkedIn, and try and get them to have a phone call with us. And we always want to try and get the candidate on the phone without sending a job description and answering a bazillion questions if we can first, because obviously we want to get them excited about the opportunity verbally. And however good that job description is, it doesn't give you that sort of color, and it never quite sells the job opportunity as well as a verbal description. And particularly if you've got something which is tricky about your role, maybe you need candidates to relocate, or maybe the company isn't obviously successful, you want to try and get them on the phone so you can add a bit of your secret sauce and get them excited about the role without them just kind of looking at a job spec going, oh no, it's not for me. So you're going to need a premium LinkedIn account that gives you a certain amount of in-mails. Now, the reality is, unfortunately, that premium LinkedIn accounts are really expensive, and it's really easy to burn through those in-mails hella quickly. You're going to probably need way more in-mails than your premium LinkedIn account is going to give you, given the nature of the number of candidates you're going to need to reach out to. So we use an email finder tool. So this is a plugin for Chrome. The one that we use is called Contact Out. And it's a paid for tool. But what it does is it gives you people's personal email addresses. I don't know how it does it. I think it crowdsources it on the internet, but it's effective. And you'll probably end up getting a personal email address for 60–70% of candidates. And compared to spending, I think a LinkedIn premium account with unlimited in-mails is really expensive. It says like 10 or 15 grand. It's a lot better value. Oh, I'm sensing a question, is there?
Yeah, there is a question from Lucas, and I think you covered some of it, Peter, but he's asking if you could recommend some software, websites for searching phone numbers or emails. And yeah, I think Contact Out is probably the best one. If you
Yeah.
have any more insider knowledge
Yeah, I mean, there
websites.
used to be one called, I think, Hunter or something, but they got bought by LinkedIn, which, considering these tools are a little bit black hats, I kind of consider the enemy. So Contacts Out is the one that we use. Yeah, it's a Chrome plugin. Yeah, it's not brilliant for phone numbers, but I think it's good for email addresses. Is Zoom Info still a thing? That might be interesting. But yeah, I'd say Contacts Out is a good one to try.
Yeah, we also have second question from Nuri.
Okay.
And Nuri is asking which one is the best, emails or just dropping sort of connection message, regular email to a candidate. She mentioned that her mentor told her that email is more like we want to sell you something to the talent. Meanwhile, we're not only selling the opportunity, but also engaging with them. So, Peter, do you have any opinion on that?
I like emails, I have to say, because like whenever I get like an invite to connect on LinkedIn from somebody random, I always know it's somebody trying to sell me something. And I often think from a candidate perspective or from a potential client perspective, you bloody cheapskate, like send me an email. So for me, I would say emails are great because sometimes when I email candidates in their personal emails, like on their Gmail or whatever, not often, but occasionally I'll get a note back saying, oh, why are you emailing my Gmail? Leave it on LinkedIn or whatever. So I quite like emails just because I think it looks official. You've obviously spent money to get them. It looks like you care and you've made an effort. So I'd say emails would be my top preference. I'd say an email to a personal email would be my second preference, and I would only send a connection request, with the 2 sentences it allows you to give you as a note saying, oh, I'd really like to speak to you about marketing director search or whatever. It just feels a bit cheap to me in terms of, it feels a bit low rent. It feels like the sort of thing you do when you're a personal trainer trying to get personal clients on LinkedIn. So you invite everybody with a partner job title to connect to you. It doesn't feel very targeted. It doesn't feel very special.
I think that's it in terms of the questions for now, but if you do have any more questions, please ask and we'll happily answer them during the presentation.
Okay. One of the big challenges that we all face when it comes to getting hold of candidates on LinkedIn is noise. Good candidates get multiple approaches from recruiters every day. And that's a problem for everybody, right? Because LinkedIn has democratized the headhunting industry so much that any Tom, Dick, or Harry can reach out to anybody. And that doesn't always result in great experiences for candidates. So what we've got to do when we send these messages to people, whether on email or in-mails or whatever, is we've got to balance kind of mystique with specificness, right? Obviously, we can't just email candidates and go, hey, I've got a great opportunity for you. Do you want to jump on a call? I wish that works, but it doesn't. So what we've got to do is we obviously got to tell them a bit about, what is the company? I don't want to name the company because I want there to be a little bit of mystique there. But high level, what do they do? Maybe some high level facts that might be interesting. So it could be I'm looking for a chief marketing officer for a mobile games company with a $500 billion market cap parent company, or it could be I'm looking to recruit a engineering director for a innovative online fashion business. They've just raised Series A funding of $20 million, and you're looking for somebody who can lead a high growth engineering team of 20 people, or whatever it is. So you need to give enough color to give the candidates meat, but not so much color that it becomes kind of boring and there's no kind of mystique or intrigue there. Now, obviously, there's going to be a structural difference here in terms of whether you work for an agency, in which case having a bit of mystique and mystery is easier in a way, versus if you work in-house, and obviously the candidate can see exactly who you're working for and that sort of thing. And I think if you work in-house, what you've got to try and do is, again, trying to get that sense of how do candidates kind of perceive your company, and how can you kind of describe it in the best light? I think as external recruiters, we naturally have a sense of that because we've worked with different clients and we've felt about how different kind of pitches kind of work. I think if you're just working for one company, it's not always easy sometimes to step outside of that and sort of view it through somebody else's kind of shoes. But think about, okay, how do you sort of, I guess, dress it up in the best kind of possible way? A lot of candidates will, ask you 1,000,001 questions before doing a phone call with you, and it's frustrating as a recruiter. They'll ask you for job descriptions before jumping on a call. Sometimes you just have to send them, and there's no other way to get a candidate on a call before them, which is again why it's important to write really engaging job descriptions. Often they'll obviously ask you for details on package ahead of a call. Now, experienced recruiters will know this, but never sell candidates in on package, right? A mistake that pretty much every recruiter makes at some point in their career, I certainly did in my early career, is selling candidates in on package. And it goes something like this. You get briefed by the client in terms of what they're looking for. And naturally you ask them, and rightly you ask them, how much can you afford to pay this person? And they say, well, I think we can afford to pay them a salary of between 100 and 150,000. And okay, great. So on with that information, off you go. Now, the candidate asks you, okay, how much does the role pay? And you say, well, it pays between 100 and 150,000. Now, what tends to happen is that the candidate remembers just the highest number you mentioned, 150,000. And then it gets all the way to offer stage, and the candidate's only paid 100,000 as a salary, but they're expecting 150,000. You've set the expectation with them that this is a 150,000 pounds job, and they don't get 150,000 pounds offer because the company doesn't want to give them a 50% pay rise. They get 120,000 pounds offer. And when they reject the offer, they tell your line manager that Peter told me it was a 150K job. And now we've got a rejected offer and it's my fault because I've misset expectations. And so there's also the fact that 1,000,000,001 candidates will ask you about package, but what you've got to do is you've got to come up with skilled ways of dancing around the question a little bit to give them enough satisfaction to get them on a call, but not so much information that's going to come back and bite you in the arse later on. There's different ways you can do that. So I often say to candidates, look, excuse me, it's not from my job to define what offer for you looks like, not least because I've never spoken to you. We haven't even discussed the opportunity. And of course, it's bespoke. It's tailored to fit different situations and different needs in terms of, so you might have one candidate who's really proven and really senior, really expensive, and another one who's less proven, but it's really talented and up and coming, and they might command different salaries. So I can't tell you it will be this or it will be that, but obviously rest assured, it's not in my interest to pursue candidates that we can't close. It's not a good use of anyone's time. So if I ever feel that for you as a candidate, you're too expensive or it's not going to work, then I'll let you know, obviously, and we can sort of put out the process. You can also try and flip the question around. So look, give me a sense of how much you're paid today, and then I'll give you a read in terms of whether that's kind of in the zone or not. But yeah, be careful about sharing too many specifics too early in a comp, because it can come back and bite you in the arse. Positive statistics are really, really helpful. Because what we want to do is we want to sell the opportunity, but we don't want to be salesy, right? Being salesy is when you go to the, electronic showroom at John Lewis and the salesman goes, oh yeah, I got one of these at home, mate. Yeah, it's really, really good, right? That's salesy, right? Using positive statistics to sell something is, over the last 12 months, we've doubled revenues, or, our business has a market cap of $200 billion, right? Or whatever, use positive statistics to reinforce your point. Now, there's different kind of themes that you can use when you're pitching a role to someone on the phone that are going to be helpful to you when it comes to, I guess, selling candidates into roles. One of the most pervasive themes is influence. And influence can manifest itself in different ways. Bear in mind that most of the candidates you're going to talk to are probably feeling a little bit underappreciated and a little bit underloved in terms of their current employer. So we can use this theme of influence as a central theme of our role, and we want to give the candidate a sense of why this is a really important role. Now, it could be a really important role because it's just a big role, right? You've got lots of team and lots of budget and lots of stuff going on. But equally, it doesn't have to be that. In fact, you can have influence in a failing company, in one that's in need of a turnaround. I call it the kind of the Superman pitch, right? The hero pitch, right? this company is struggling. We got problems, right? Things aren't going that well. What we need is somebody to come in and, in a really strategic, important, influential role, come in and turn this around and really make a difference. You'd be surprised, actually, these kind of turnaround pitches, even if the company is evidently not being that successful, if the role has influence and if this person can really make a difference in that context and you can make that really come to life, you'll be surprised in terms of how many candidates you can convert. Another kind of pitch is what I call a scale pitch. And these are, in a way, the easiest ones to pull off. If, like me, you've got a background in doing hard recruitment projects for early stage companies, but if you work for bigger companies, it's a lot easier, right? Because ultimately candidates like the security and the safety that big numbers and big companies give you. It doesn't feel very risky. So you can say, look, I did a search recently for a private equity-backed software company where someone was managing a team of 2,000 engineers. That was a scale pitch. It was 700 million revenues, the third biggest healthcare software company in the world, 2,000 engineers, we're acquisitive, we've got private equity behind us, we're taking over the world, look at what a big role this is, right? That's a scale pitch. So influence, scale pitches, good themes to build on. But obviously, if you're working with earlier stage companies, they might require a bit more of a conceptual explanation around what do they do, because it might not be a category that exists, it might be something quite different, quite innovative around how the world actually works. And so what you've got to do is you've got to capture, obviously, all that stuff you know about the business, all the things you know, and you've got to distill it into a pithy, short 3 to 5 minute pitch that the average man or the average woman on the street is going to get. Try and avoid too many sort of industry buzzwords and keywords, and think, how do I simply describe this in a way that if I just literally went out on the street right now and pulled a random person who never worked in the tech sector before, that they would get it and buy into what this company is trying to do. Now, what a good pitch does to candidates verbally on the phone is it answers obvious questions like, what's the company, what does it do, what's the role, what are their responsibility for, where is it based, etc. And it sprinkles helpful statistics that sell the role to candidates. It could be team size, revenues, growth, whatever, market opportunity. So it sprinkles in useful facts along the way, but also it has a narrative, it has a flow. An average pitch is just like a list of facts, but without any kind of narrative that makes sense. A good pitch tells a story. It's like reading a chapter of a book. It has a start, a middle, and an end. So for me, when I phone candidates, there's no one right or wrong way of doing it. Different people have different styles. I'll often ask the candidate, well, okay, so first of all, I'll always check whether now's still a good time to talk. Even though I've arranged the call, I'll check whether now's a good time to have the call. Secondly, I will never assume that the candidate is looking. Probably not least because I might not know the candidate that well, and they might be too senior for the role that I'm working on, and I don't want to patronize them. So what I'll often do is I'll say, look, I wanted to reach out to you about this because I want to see either if it could be of interest to you, or if it's not of interest to you, maybe it's of interest to someone you know. So you could be a candidate, you could be a source. And the reason why, source in headhunter parlance means somebody who isn't interested themselves, might refer you to other interested people. Maybe they're too senior or they're the wrong function, but they're well connected and they might know the right people. So by leaving it open that way, you lessen the risk of potentially pissing the candidate off by pitching them a role that's too junior for them. So I always ask them, is now a good time to chat? And I'll position it as could be for you, could be for someone else, let's see. And often I'll check how familiar they are with the company. Now, obviously I won't do that if it's like, eBay or something super obvious, but if it's an early stage company, I'll always ask them, are you familiar with company X? How much do you know about them? Because I want to figure out how much detail do I want to go into, because I might need to go into a lot of detail if they don't know it. But if they do, I don't want to patronize them at the same time. So it's finding that kind of balance. So you want to tell them a bit about what the company does. Obviously, you want to weave the role in and why it's such an important, influential, super cool role in there as well. Maybe touch a little bit on what it is that we're looking for and the kind of candidate we're liking. Touch a bit on the location and sort of stuff like that. And say, look, is there any questions, anything I can tell you in order to help you qualify the opportunity? And for me personally, I like to separate the me kind of describing the opportunity to you call and the I'm qualifying you as a candidate call into two separate calls. Now you can combine them, but I think the reason why I don't like doing it that much is it sends out kind of mixed messages like, yeah, I'm headhunting you. By the way, are you the right candidate? I'm not really sure. I don't know much about you, right? Doesn't mean we're pretending to know a lot about candidates that we don't, but I think separating the are you interested call from the, let's qualify your experience call is both more flattering to the candidates, it makes them feel more like they're being headhunted, but also it's more efficient from a time perspective for you, because if you spend half an hour on the phone with the candidate and they tell us to be not interested in the end anyway, it's kind of a waste of time a little bit. And so better to have lots of kind of fairly quick and dirty pitch calls, 10, 15 minutes, send out the job spec, build your pipeline of candidates, and then do another call with them later to qualify their experience, I think, rather than try and kind of do both in one. That's not always quite as efficient. Now, the reality is, as a headhunter, you're going to be talking to lots of candidates over the course of a project. It could be 50, it could be 100, might be more in some projects. You ain't going to be able to come up with 50 or 100 completely unique pitches. Nobody does. But the important thing is not to sound scripty. Now, because we're giving people similar pitches, we might be using 80% of the same content. But rule number one of avoiding scriptiness is don't write a script, because it becomes obvious when you're reading to whoever's listening to it. By all means, if you want to use bullet points, even better, just memorize it and think it through in your head. But you can use techniques, even though your pitch is pretty unoriginal for candidate number 49, to make it feel new and fresh, because no candidate wants to feel like another sausage in the sausage factory, right? You want to make them feel special, make them feel unique. Different techniques you can do that. So not using a script is obviously a very good start. One thing about scripty sounding stuff is that I'm not using any intonation in my voice. Everything is very regular. There is a rhythm of what I'm saying that is completely like this, and people don't actually really talk like this. Because when people actually talk about stuff, sometimes I'm talking really quickly, I'm getting excited about something, the tone of my voice is raising, and then sometimes maybe I'm talking a bit more slowly because I want to emphasize a point. So you want to make sure that the rhythm of what you say isn't just this incredibly regular staccato thing, because it makes it sound like you're reading from a script. So you want to both change the rhythm. So you want to go fast sometimes, you want to go slow at other times. That's more natural. You also want to change the tone of your voice. You want to crescendo at certain moments, because when I'm talking about something, I'm getting faster, I'm getting excited about it. And sometimes I want to be a bit more calm. And again, that's natural, and that's how people do things. You can also throw in ums and ers. Even though I kind of know what I'm going to say kind of pretty much word for word, I'm going to throw in some ums and ers just for theatrical effect, just so it doesn't sound too perfect and scripty. So don't be too eloquent. Don't be too neat, too precise. That sounds scripty. By all means, touch on the very same themes and use similar points and similar arguments, but deliver them in a way that is engaging, that is exciting, try and ad-lib it a bit so that it doesn't sound scripty. And I think, particularly when you're starting out approaching candidates on the phone, scripts are comforting, but also very noticeable. And, you don't want to, you don't want to give candidates the sense you're just kind of reading off a script. So yeah, so in terms of the job descriptions, I spend the bulk of the job description selling the company and the role. Don't spend loads of time waffling on about all your cultural values and shit that I'm sure your HR people have a field day about, but frankly candidates couldn't really give two hoots about. Think about when you're describing the responsibilities of the role, this is an opportunity to sell to the candidate, right? Describe the role in an interesting way. I like these power words at the start of sentences. Create the right content strategy for company X, drive aggressive revenue growth, lead a high-performing team of software engineers, all these kinds of things that make it sound like an exciting kind of dynamic kind of role. And I'd say, take the time to write a quality PowerPoint job description. It will make a real difference in terms of conversing candidates. I know it's easy to do quick and dirty, 2-page Word document and that sort of thing, but it's not helpful when it comes to enrolling candidates. And the quality of your literature and that sort of thing, it does make an absolutely huge difference in terms of enrolling candidates. I think the only other thing I wanted to touch on when it comes to approaching candidates is that, particularly when you're young and you're inexperienced, phoning up senior candidates can be a little bit scary. I think the important thing to note is that if you work as a recruiter, and if you're professional, if you're courteous, if you're knowledgeable, if you're considerate, if you treat people as you wish to be treated them yourself, you will already create a much stronger experience with candidates than many other recruiters out there. So never feel that what you're doing is on a pedestal. People honestly have quite low expectations as a recruiter about what you know and what you don't, and therefore it should be quite easy, quite straightforward to surpass those expectations. Secondly, it's really important, particularly when you're young and you're talking to candidates on the phone, even though you might feel like I'm kind of winging it a little bit and I'm out of my depth, there's fundamentally, an old colleague of mine put it quite nicely, there's three kinds of relationships that you have with people: adult to child, child to adult, or adult to adult. You want to make sure you're having one of those adult to adult type relationships. The mistakes sometimes I see junior recruiters kind of doing is they project downwards instead of upwards. They think, okay, if I make myself seem really junior, then actually people will have lower expectations of me and therefore I won't fuck up. But that's completely the wrong way of looking at it. What you want to do is you want to project upwards so people regard you as a peer and they treat you with respect. Don't ever make yourself seem junior in the eyes of a candidate. Like, every industry is full of buzzwords. The technology industry absolutely is jam-packed full of them. And there's been many, many occasions where candidates say stuff you don't really know what they're talking about. Never be afraid to ask, sorry, it might be a dumb question or whatever, but you can tell me, what does this mean? People have a lot more respect for people who are honest and ask good questions and aren't afraid to ask good questions. They want to know and they want to truly understand, compared to people who are just like, yeah, what the fuck does that mean? So I think never be afraid to ask dumb questions. I've probably found out 60% of what I know about technology and internet industry just from talking to candidates and just from the insights that they bring as experts in different fields. So I think don't be phone shy, and it's like anything else, just practice. The more you talk to candidates, the more confidence you'll have, and you'll find that you'll be able to hopefully convert those really, really strong passive candidates who don't respond to job adverts and who wouldn't normally be interested in in your particular position. So good. Well, look, that's it in terms of my my presentation. So any further questions you'll answer?
No, unfortunately, we don't have any new questions so far, but I did remind people to ask any final questions if they have, but nobody has, unfortunately.
No worries. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to put my hand up. I was just going to say I was waxing lyrical, and I had absolutely no idea how long I was talking for, because I was like, the screen was showing the whole presentation, and I'm pleased that more by luck than by judgment I've got us to 11:56 rather than finishing wildly early or wildly late. Well, if there aren't any other sort of questions and stuff, let's sort of wrap it up here. And I want to say firstly thank you to our audience for coming along, and hopefully it's been helpful. For some of you there may have been a lot of stuff you already know, but maybe there were little nuggets of useful information in that you might not have considered. And yeah, look, it'd be good to keep in touch. And thank you for taking the time to chat with us today.
Thank you very much, guys. And yes, the recording will be available on YouTube, I think. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah, I've got a bit of uploading to do, but yeah, I'll put it on YouTube later on. And yeah, I'll say to our audience, don't become so good at headhunting now that there's no work left for us external agencies. But yeah, hopefully there's some good useful stuff in there for you. And I think our next event is going to be on investing in software companies. And so we're putting together a rather kick-ass panel about that. So yeah, keep an eye on our company page on LinkedIn. And if you're interested in attending the next one, do let us know.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Cheers.
Thank you. Bye.